Picture a plateau of orange and ochre sandstone rising sheer from the desert floor. The rock here has been carved by winds over millions of years into shapes that seem impossible. Arches, needles, columns, mushroom-topped towers. The silence here is total. The sky above is a blue so deep it's almost violet. And across the faces of the cliffs, protected from the sun by overhanging rock, are paintings. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, made by human hands 8, 9, 10,000 years ago, when this desert was a savanna, when elephants and giraffes and hippos roamed where the sand now blows. You are standing in Tassili, Niger, in the heart of the Sahara, and you are looking at a plateau that's one of the most extraordinary archives of human prehistory on the face of the earth. Now come north, cross the Atlas Mountains, drop down to a coastline of white-walled cities and brilliant blue sea, Mediterranean, shimmering and ancient and full of traces of early civilization that ever sailed it. Phoenicians, Romans, Arabs, Ottomans, and French. This is Algeria, the largest country in Africa, a country that contains an ocean of sand, a string of ancient cities, an 80-year war that changed the world's understanding of colonialism, and a music born in the cabarets of Oran that swept from North Africa to the clubs of Paris and the charts of the world. We have a lot to get through. Let's begin. Welcome back to Around the World in Half an Hour. I'm Ray and this is episode 3. Last week, we were in Albania, tiny, bunker-riddled, beautiful Albania, discovering that one of Europe's smallest and least known countries had produced Mother Teresa, Dua Lipa, and arguably the best national dish on the continent. This week, we cross the Mediterranean Sea and head to North Africa. We head to a country that in terms of sheer physical scale makes Albania look like a footnote. Algeria. The country covers 919,595 square miles, roughly 2.38 million square kilometers. It is the largest country in Africa and the 10th largest in the world. It is larger than Western Europe. You could fit France into it 4.5 times and still have room left over. And yet most of that vast area, more than 4/5 of it, is Sahara Desert. Empty, ancient, extraordinary, and full of secrets. Algeria has one of the most significant independence movements in modern history, a struggle against French colonialism that lasted 132 years, ended in a war of extraordinary brutality, and produced a body of thought about colonialism, resistance, and national identity that still resonates in universities and political movements around the world. It has couscous, it has Raï, it has Zinedine Zidane, and it has the Sahara. Let's start there. Algeria sits in North Africa, facing the Mediterranean Sea along its northern coast and stretching south in one vast, increasingly arid sweep until it reaches the deep Sahara. The country shares borders with Tunisia and Libya in the northeast, Niger to the southeast, Mali and Mauritania to the southwest, Western Sahara to the west, and Morocco to the northwest. The geography divides it into two very different worlds. The north is the Algeria most Algerians live in. Coastline stretches for about 1200 kilometers along the Mediterranean, a mix of sandy beaches, rocky capes, and the harbours of major cities. Behind the coast, the land rises into the Tel Atlas mountain range, a rugged, green, historically significant range running roughly parallel to the coast. The Tel Atlas contains some of Algeria's most fertile land, its most important agricultural regions, and its most complex cultural diversity. The peaks here reach over 2300 meters, a mountain region of Kabylia, home of the Amazigh or Berber, Kabyle people, sits in this range, a landscape of terraced villages, olive groves, and a fierce, proud cultural identity that has shaped Algerian history for centuries. Further south, the Tel Atlas gives way to the high plateaus, broad, flat, semi-arid steppe country between the Tel and Saharan Atlas ranges. The Saharan Atlas is the second mountain range running roughly east-west and forming the final natural barrier before the great desert begins. And then the Sahara. More than four-fifths of Algeria is Saharan. That is an almost incomprehensible area of desert, roughly 2 million square kilometers of sand, stone, gravel, and silence. The Sahara in Algeria is not one landscape, but many. There are ergs, the classic sea of sand dunes, some of them 300 meters high, their shapes constantly shifting with the wind, their colors changing from gold to orange to deep red, depending on the light and the time of the day. The Grand Erg Oriental and the Grand Erg Occidental, the Great Eastern and Western Sand Seas, are among the largest erg systems on Earth. There are also vast hamadas, flat, stony, wind-scored plateaus of bare rock almost entirely without life. And there are the dramatic highland massifs of the central and southern Sahara, the Ahaggar mountains rising to over 2900 meters near the city of Tamanrasset, the Tassili Najar plateau with its extraordinary rock formations and prehistoric art. This Saharan landscape is ancient beyond comprehension. The sandstone formations of Tassili Najar have been shaped over 500 million years. The rock art painted on the walls was made between 10,000 and 6,000 years ago, during the period geologists call the African humid period, when the Sahara was green, when rain fell, when rivers ran, and when the animals depicted in those paintings, elephants, giraffes, hippos, crocodiles, actually lived there. Watching the Sahara dry out over millennia, those early humans painted what they saw. Their work survives, perfectly preserved in the dry air, as one of the complete records of prehistoric life on Earth. The major rivers of northern Algeria, the Shilif and Somam, flow from the Atlas ranges toward the Mediterranean. In the south, water is found only in oases, fed by underground aquifers. The oasis towns of the Saharan fringe, Biskra, Ghardaya, Tamanrasset, are extraordinary places where date palms crowd around springs in a landscape that is otherwise entirely hostile to life. The Algerian dinar is the currency, abbreviated DZD. As of 2026, roughly 134 Algerian dinars will buy you $1. Algeria's borders reflect the arbitrary lines drawn by European colonial powers across African territory in the 19th century. Lines that cut through tribal territories, ethnic groups, and ancient trade routes with complete indifference to the people they divided. To the northeast, Tunisia, a smaller, more densely populated neighbor with whom Algeria shares a broadly functional relationship, significant cross-border trade, and many cultural similarities. To the east, Libya, a more complex relationship, particularly given Libya's instability since 2011. The shared border is long, remote, and difficult to police. To the south, Niger and Mali, and here the relationships are significant. The central Saharan region is home to the Tuareg people, a nomadic Amazigh people whose territory covers huge swaths of Algeria, Mali, Niger, and Libya, and who have a long history of conflict with central governments that do not understand or respect their way of life. Tuareg rebellions in Mali and Niger in recent decades have had direct implications for security in southern Algeria. The region around Tamanrasset and the southern borders is one of the more complex security zones in Africa. To the west, Mauritania and Western Sahara, the later disputed territory partially controlled by Morocco and partially by the Sahrawi independence movement, the Polisario Front, which Algeria has historically supported. And to the northwest, Morocco, the most politically charged of all Algeria's borders. The Algeria-Morocco border has been officially closed since 1994, following a terrorist attack that Morocco blamed partly on Algerian intelligence. The two countries have no diplomatic relations and the border remains sealed. A surreal situation given that they share a language, a religion, a culture, and centuries of intertwined history. The underlying dispute is primarily about Western Sahara. Algeria supports Sahrawi independence. Morocco opposes it. This is a frozen conflict that has enormous consequences for the entire Maghreb region. Algeria's history is so long and so layered that we can only sketch its outlines in half an hour. But let's try. The first people we know by name in the land are the Amazigh, the Berbers, the indigenous people of North Africa. The Amazigh have lived in what is now Algeria for at least 10,000 years, probably much longer. They are not a single people but a collection of related groups. Kabil in the mountains near Algiers, Shawi in the Ores Mountains, Mozabite in the Mzab Valley, Tuareg in the deep Sahara, speaking related Amazigh languages and sharing a broadly common cultural heritage. They are the bedrock of Algerian identity, though their role has often been suppressed or minimized in the official national narrative. The ancient history of the Algerian coast is a parade of great civilizations. The Phoenicians established trading posts here from around the 12th century BCE, including the city that would become Carthage, the greatest trading empire of ancient Mediterranean, based across the water in what is now Tunisia, but with deep roots in the Algerian coastal cities. The Numidian kingdom, an indigenous North African state allied sometimes with Carthage, sometimes with Rome, produced one of antiquity's most fascinating characters, Jugurtha, the Numidian king who for 17 years fought the Roman Republic to a standstill, winning battles against vastly superior forces through intelligence and mobility before being betrayed and captured and strangled in a Roman dungeon in 104 BCE. The Romans called his war the war they could not win. The Romans eventually prevailed over Numidia and made North Africa one of the most prosperous parts of their empire. The province of Numidia became a breadbasket, grain, olive oil, and timber flowing from its fertile lands to feed Rome. The Roman cities built here were magnificent. Timgad, founded by Emperor Trajan in 100 CE, was a perfectly planned Roman grid city, complete with forum, theatre, libraries, and triumphal arches, now spectacularly preserved in the high plateaus of northeastern Algeria. Gemila, another Roman city, perched on a mountain ridge, its temples and basilicas and market squares emerging from the earth in a state of extraordinary preservation. Tipasa, on the coast, its ruins tumbling into the Mediterranean, wild flowers growing between the marble columns. Algeria also gave the Roman world and therefore the Christian world one of its greatest theological minds, Augustine of Hippo. Saint Augustine was born in 354 CE in Thagaste, in what is now northeastern Algeria. He became bishop of Hippo Regius, modern Annaba, and wrote the Confessions and the City of God, two of the most influential books in Western intellectual history. He is considered one of the founding fathers of Western Christianity. He was North African, Amazigh, and Algerian. That is a remarkable provenance. In the 7th century, the Arab conquest brought Islam to North Africa. The process was not instantaneous. The Amazigh resisted for decades, famously under the leadership of a warrior queen known as Al-Kahina, the prophetess who led a guerrilla war against the Arab forces in the late 7th century from the Oran Mountains. She is one of the most extraordinary figures in the history of the Maghreb, a woman who for a brief period united Amazigh and other tribes in resistance to a new imperial power. She was eventually defeated and killed, but her memory endures as a symbol of Amazigh resistance, of feminine courage, and of complexity of North African identity. Islam took root, transformed, and deepened. Over the following centuries, the Maghreb became a center of Islamic learning and commerce. The medieval city of Tlemcen in western Algeria became one of the great cultural capitals of the Islamic world, a city of mosques, madrasas, and learned scholars, rivaling Fez and Cairo for intellectual prestige. In the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire extended its reach to the Algerian coast. The city of Algiers became an Ottoman regency, technically under Ottoman suzerainty, but effectively self-governing, and it became notoriously a base for the Berberi corsairs, pirates of the North African coast, who raided European shipping, seized cargo, and enslaved European sailors and passengers by the hundreds of thousands of over 2 centuries. The corsairs operated out of Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, and their raids reached as far as Iceland and the west coast of Ireland. The ransoming of European captives was a major industry. The corsairs were simultaneously pirates, privateers operating with Ottoman permission, and, in the Algerian telling, freedom fighters defending their shores against European aggression. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle. Then came the French. On June 14, 1830, a French military expedition landed on the Algerian coast, ostensibly in response to an insult by the Ottoman Dey, the local ruler, to a French diplomat. The real reasons were more mundane: a French government seeking popular support, the memory of Napoleon, the wealth of North Africa. Within weeks, Algiers had fallen. What followed was 132 years of French colonial rule, and it was brutal from beginning to end. But French did not merely administer Algeria, they colonized it. European settlers, the Pieds Noirs, Blackfeet as they were called, arrived in their hundreds of thousands, taking the best agricultural land, establishing cities in the French style, and building an economy that served their interests at the expense of Algerian Muslim majority. By the mid-20th century, there were over 1 million European settlers in Algeria. The indigenous Algerian population was denied citizenship, subjected to separate legal systems, excluded from political life, and systematically impoverished. Resistance began immediately. The great leader of early Algerian resistance was Abdel Khadir, an Islamic scholar's son who in 1832 was proclaimed leader of the Western Algerian tribes and launched a guerrilla war against the French that lasted 15 years. He was a brilliant military commander, a just ruler. He issued orders protecting French prisoners and civilians from abuse at a time when the French were burning villages and massacring civilians with impunity, and a man of remarkable intellectual depth. When he was finally defeated and went into exile, French intellectuals celebrated him as one of the great men of the age. Abdel Khadir is revered in Algeria as the father of the nation. His portrait hangs in offices and homes across the country. The city of Mascara in western Algeria was his base of operations and remains proud of this association. The massacre that turned resistance into revolutionary determination happened in 1945. On May 8th, the very day the Allied victory in Europe was being celebrated, Algerian nationalists marched in the town of Sétif, carrying flags and banners calling for independence. French police opened fire. What followed was a massacre. French forces and settlers killing between 6,000 and 45,000 Algerians across the region. In the following days, depending on which historical estimate you use. The French government's official figure was a fraction of that. For Algerians, Sétif was the moment they understood that peaceful independence was impossible. 9 years later, on November 1, 1954, All Saints' Day, a date deliberately chosen to maximize psychological impact in a Catholic France, The FLN, Front de Libération Nationale, launched coordinated attacks on French military and civilian targets across Algeria. The Algerian War of Independence had begun. The war lasted 8 years and was fought with extraordinary ferocity on both sides. The French deployed up to 500,000 troops. The FLN used guerrilla warfare, urban bombing campaigns, and international diplomacy to draw world attention to their cause. The Battle of Algiers, 1956 to 57, in which FLN fighters launched a campaign of urban attacks in the capital while French paratroopers responded with mass arrests, systematic torture, and summary executions, became one of the defining confrontations of the colonial era. The French general's use of torture was not a rogue operation, but official policy. And when it became known in France, it split French society. Intellectuals, students, left-wing politicians, many turned against the war. French forces increased to 500,000 troops and managed to regain military control, but only through brutal measures, and the ferocity of the fighting sapped the political will of the French to continue the conflict. The philosopher Albert Camus, born in Algeria, the son of a French settler family, wrote about the war with anguished complexity. Unable to fully endorse either side, torn between his love for the Algeria of his childhood and his recognition of the justice of the independence movement. His position was widely criticized by both sides. He died in a car accident in 1960, 2 years before independence, without seeing the end. The war ended with the Evian Accords in March 1962, a ceasefire agreement between France and the FLN, and on July 5th, 1962, the 132nd anniversary of the French landing, Algeria declared independence. After 8 years of war, perhaps a million Algerian dead, and the displacement of nearly the entire European settler community, Algeria was free. The post-independence decades were turbulent. A one-party state under the FLN, the nationalism of oil and gas, periods of relative prosperity in the 1970s when oil prices were high, and then the Black Decade, the 1990s civil war between the military-backed government and Islamist insurgents, triggered when the military cancelled elections in 1992, that the Islamist FIS party was poised to win. Over 100,000 people were killed in what became one of the most brutal internal conflicts in the Arab world. The scars have not fully healed. Today, Algeria is politically stable but tightly controlled. The Hirah protest movement of 2019, when millions of Algerians took to the streets demanding political reform, was one of the most significant popular movements in the country's recent history. The protests succeeded in forcing out the long-serving president Bouteflika, who had ruled for 20 years, but the deeper structural changes the movement sought have not yet arrived. Algeria has a population of around 48.5 million people as of 2026, with its capital in Algiers. Algiers, Al-Jazair in Arabic, meaning the islands, is a city of some 3 to 4 million people, spectacularly situated on a bay of the Mediterranean. Its white-walled older district, the Kasbah, climbing the hillside above the port. Other major cities include Oran on the western coast, Algeria's second city and the cradle of Raï music, Constantine on the northeast, built dramatically on a rocky plateau above a deep gorge, and Annaba in the far northeast. The economy is dominated by hydrocarbons. Petroleum and natural gas account for the vast majority of export earnings, with Italy, France, and Spain as the main buyers. Algeria is a significant member of OPEC and one of the world's major natural gas exporters. The challenge, well understood by Algerian economists and policymakers, is that an economy built on hydrocarbons is vulnerable to price shocks and cannot last indefinitely. Diversification is the stated priority of successive governments. Progress has been slow. The society is predominantly Arab-speaking and Muslim, but the Amazigh identity, suppressed for decades in the post-independence push for Arab nationalist unity, has seen a powerful revival. The Amazigh language, Tamazight, has been recognized as a national language alongside Arabic since 2016 and as an official language since 2016. The Kabyle people of the mountains remain one of the most politically vocal communities in Algeria, consistently pushing back against centralized authority. French remains widely spoken. Algeria was a French colony for 132 years, and the linguistic legacy of that relationship runs deep. Most educated Algerians are genuinely trilingual. Arabic, Amazigh, or Algerian dialect Arabic, and French. Saint Augustine. Born Aurelius Augustinus Hipponensis in 354 CE in Tagaste, in what is now the Souk Ahras region of northeastern Algeria, one of the most influential thinkers in Western history. His Confessions, a frank account of his intellectual and spiritual journey from hedonism to Christian faith, is considered the first autobiography in Western literature. His City of God shaped Christian political theology for 1,000 years. He is a doctor of the church, a saint revered by Catholics, Orthodox Christians, and Protestants alike. He was Algerian. He spoke Punic and Latin. He understood the Mediterranean world from its African edge. His thought is inseparable from where he came from. Abd al-Qadir, the great 19th century resistance leader, already met in our history section, but worth pausing on again, because he was not just a military commander. He was a philosopher, a poet, a Sufi mystic, and a man who, in his exile in Damascus, protected Christian communities during sectarian violence in 1860, an act for which he received the Légion d'honneur from Napoleon III and a letter of thanks from Abraham Lincoln. A man of the 19th century who managed to be simultaneously a military genius, a religious intellectual, and a humanitarian. His city in the American Midwest, al-Qadir, Iowa, was named after him by settlers who admired him. A city in Iowa named after an Algerian Muslim freedom fighter. The world is full of surprises. Albert Camus, born in 1913 in Drian, then part of French Algeria, to a working-class French settler family. He grew up in the poor Belcourt neighborhood of Algiers, excelled at school on a scholarship, and became one of the greatest French language writers of the 20th century. His novel, The Stranger, published in 1942, is one of the most widely read French novels in history. A spare, precise, philosophically charged story of an Algerian murder and its consequences. The Plague, published in 1947, is a rich allegory of resistance, solidarity, and human endurance that gained new readers with every epidemic the world subsequently faced. In 1957, Camus won the Nobel Prize in Literature at age 44, one of the youngest recipients in the prize's history. He was killed in a car accident in 1960. He never stopped being Algerian, even when Algeria stopped claiming him. Frantz Fanon, not Algerian by birth, he was born in Martinique in the Caribbean, but so central to the Algerian independence movement that he belongs in this story. A psychiatrist by training, Fanon joined the FLN, worked in Algerian hospitals during the war, and wrote The Wretched of the Earth, a searing, brilliant analysis of colonialism, decolonization, and the psychological damage that colonial rule inflicts on the colonized. Published in 1961 with a preface by Jean-Paul Sartre, it became the intellectual manifesto of anti-colonial movements around the world, from Africa to Latin America to the American civil rights movement. Fanon died of leukemia in 1961, aged just 36, barely seeing the independence he had given his life to. His ideas are more alive today than ever. Zinedine Zidane, born 1972 in the La Castellane neighborhood of Marseille, France, to parents who had emigrated from the Kabyle region of Algeria. He is, by most assessments, one of two or three greatest footballers in the history of the sport. His control of the ball was so elegant, so total, so seemingly effortless, that watching him play felt like watching someone improvise music. He won the 1998 World Cup with France, was twice named FIFA World Player of the Year, won the Champions League with Real Madrid, and after retiring as a player, returned to Real Madrid as a manager and won 3 consecutive Champions League titles. He is also remembered for one of the most infamous moments in World Cup history, headbutting Marco Materazzi in the chest in the 2006 World Cup final, receiving a red card and ending his career in that manner. He has never fully explained what Materazzi said to him. He is a hero in Algeria, a hero in France, and the greatest footballer who wore the number 5. Cheb Khaled, born in 1960 in Oran, the undisputed king of Raï. We'll talk about Raï in detail shortly, but Khaled deserves individual mention here. He has sold over 80 million albums worldwide, making him the best-selling Arabic language singer in history. His 1992 hit Didi was an inspirational international phenomenon. His song Aisha topped the French charts for months. He is the most internationally recognized Algerian musician in history, and his voice, warm, slightly rough, joyful, is the sound of Algeria to millions of people around the world. Assia Jabbar, born 1936 in Cherchell, Algeria, died 2015. One of the greatest francophone writers of the 20th century. Her novels and essays exploring Algerian women's history, the colonial experience, and the relationship between French language and Algerian identity are among the most important literary works produced in the Arab-speaking world. She was the first Algerian to be elected to the Académie Française. She was a perennial Nobel Prize candidate. She deserves to be far more widely read than she is. Algerian cuisine is a beautiful, generous, layered thing, built on a foundation of Amazigh and Arab cooking, shaped by centuries of Ottoman influence, and carrying a distinctly French undertow from the colonial years. It is the cuisine of the Maghreb, which means roughly that it is built around wheat, lamb, olive oil, spices, and the extraordinary flavor of slow cooking. Couscous. Let's begin here because couscous is fundamental. Couscous is often paired with meat and vegetables in Algerian cuisine, but to say that barely scratches the surface. Couscous is not a dish, it is a culinary tradition. The grain made from semolina wheat, rubbed by hand into tiny balls, steamed over a broth in a special two-part pot called a couscousière, is the canvas on which the real work happens. Each region prepares couscous differently. Algiers uses a sweet savory faya preparation. Constantine makes a sweet mesfouf version, and in Kabil it is served with buttermilk. In the Saharan south, you find versions made with dates and dried fruits. Couscous is eaten on Fridays, the holy day, at family gatherings, at celebrations, and when guests arrive. It is the language of hospitality. Shorba, a rich, fragrant soup made with lamb or chicken, tomatoes, chickpeas, coriander, and vermicelli noodles. It is the soup of Ramadan, the dish that breaks the fast each evening during the holy month. Across Algeria, as the sun goes down in Ramadan, the smell of shorba rises from a million households simultaneously. It is warming, sustaining, and deeply comforting. Tagine, slow cooked stews of lamb or chicken with vegetables and spices cooked in the conical earthenware pot that gives the dish its name. Algerian tagines are rich with cumin, saffron, cinnamon, and ras el hanout, the spice blend whose name translates as top of the shop, meaning the seller's finest mixture. Every spice merchant has their own secret recipe. Merguez, spiced lamb and beef sausages flavored with harissa, chili paste, cumin, and coriander, grilled over charcoal until the skin blisters and the fat burns. Originally an Algerian and Tunisian creation, merguez has become one of the most beloved street foods in France, a direct legacy of the Algerian immigrant community. When you eat merguez at a French street market, you are eating Algeria. Mahajeb, semolina flatbreads filled with a spiced mixture of onions, tomatoes, and sometimes minced meat, folded into squares and cooked on a flat griddle until they are crisp on the outside and steaming within. It is the Algerian street snack. In the city, Mahajeb vendors set up their griddles on pavements and in markets, and the smell, that combination of sizzling dough and spiced filling, is one of the great olfactory signatures of an Algerian city. Meshwi, a whole lamb marinated in a paste of butter, garlic, cumin, and coriander, roasted slowly over a pit fire for hours until the meat fails from the bone. Meshwi is festival food, celebration food, the thing you cook when a wedding happens, when guests of honor arrive, when there is something real to celebrate. The tradition of Meshwi runs across the entire Maghreb, but Algeria does it with particular conviction. Makrood, semolina pastries stuffed with a filling of dates or almonds, deep fried and soaked in honey syrup. They are the color of amber, sticky, fragrant with orange blossom water and cinnamon, and criminally easy to eat in large quantities. Made for celebrations, for Eid, for the joy of guests. Dates. And not just any dates. The Deglet Noor variety, grown in the oasis around Biskra in the northern Sahara, is one of the finest date varieties on earth. The name means finger of light, and they are translucent, honey sweet with a caramel depth that mass-produced dates cannot approach. Algeria is one of the world's largest date exporters, and the date harvest season in the Biskra oasis is one of the great agricultural spectacles of North Africa. Algerian mint tea culture is omnipresent. Sweet green tea with fresh mint is served as a hospitality ritual, and the French colonial legacy means that the cafe culture of Algeria is real and deep. Baguettes and café au lait are morning staples in ways that would feel entirely familiar in Paris. Tassili Najar, in the far southeast of Algeria, the UNESCO World Heritage Site, is one of the most extraordinary places on earth. A plateau of eroded sandstone formations rising from the Sahara, containing over 15,000 prehistoric rock paintings and engravings made between 10,000 and 6,000 years ago. The art depicts the animals that once inhabited this region: elephants, giraffes, hippos, aurochs, and the humans who lived alongside them, hunting, dancing, herding cattle. It is the most expensive collection of prehistoric rock art in the world, and it sits in the middle of a desert landscape of such dramatic beauty that the paintings almost become secondary. Access requires an expedition, guides, camels or vehicles, camping equipment. Getting there is an adventure, being there is transformative. Timgad, in the Aures Mountains of northeastern Algeria. This Roman city, founded by Emperor Trajan in 100 CE, is one of the best preserved examples of Roman urban planning in the world. Their grid layout survives streets, forum, theatre, library, arch of Trajan. It was buried under sand and silt after being destroyed in the 7th century, which preserved it remarkably. UNESCO listed it in 1982, standing on the main boulevard of Timgad, looking down a street that has been unchanged for 1900 years, is one of those moments when history stops being abstract. Gemila, another spectacular Roman city perched on a mountain ridgeline in the Khabil region. Its name means beautiful in Arabic, given to it by the Arabs who found it, centuries after it had been abandoned. The temples, basilicas, and market halls are in extraordinary condition. Albert Camus wrote a famous essay about Jamila, about the wind that blows constantly through its ruins, about the feeling of standing in a place where time has stopped. The Kasbah of Algiers, Algiers, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The old walled city of Algiers climbs a steep hill above the modern port in a labyrinth of narrow streets, crumbling Ottoman mansions, whitewashed houses, and mosques. It is one of the finest surviving examples of Ottoman era urban architecture in North Africa. It is also, as all old Medinas are, a living place. People live here, shops operate, coffee is drunk in small cafes. The Kasbah was the setting for much of the Battle of Algiers and carries that history in its stones. The Ahaggar Mountains and Tamanrasset. In the deep south, the Ahaggar is a volcanic massif of extraordinary drama, dark, jagged, and ancient rock formations rising from the pale desert floor. This is Tuareg country. The city of Tamanrasset is the southern capital, a desert town that serves as the base for expeditions into the Ahaggar and toward the Tassili. The Asakrim Plateau at 2,728 meters offers what many travelers consider the finest sunrise in Africa, a view across hundreds of kilometers of desert and mountain as the first light hits the peaks. The Mzab Valley, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This valley in the northern Sahara contains five remarkable fortified towns. Ksur, built by the Mozabite Berber community in the 11th century. The towns are arranged around hilltop mosques in a distinctive, almost minimalist architectural style that has directly influenced 20th century architects, including Le Corbusier. The Mzab communities have maintained their traditions, their architectural style, and their particular form of Ibadi Islam for 1,000 years with remarkable consistency. Gardaiya is the largest and most accessible of the five towns. Oran, Algeria's second city and the soul of Raï music, a Mediterranean port city with a distinctive mix of Ottoman, French colonial, and Amazigh architecture. The Fort Santa Cruz above the city gives panoramic views over the bay. And in the cabarets and music avenues of the city, Raï music was born, a story we are about to tell. Now, the music. Raï, the word means opinion in Arabic, and in Algerian dialect it can also mean my way or my point of view. It is one of the great popular forms of music of the 20th century, born in the cabarets and working class cafes of Oran in 1920s. Raï music first emerged as a voice of resistance in the cabarets and working class cafes of Oran in colonial Algeria. It tackled taboo subjects head on, such as desire, sexuality, and partying. The early Raï was swung by women, the Shikhat, who performed at celebrations and in cabarets, singing frankly about love, longing, alcohol, and the realities of women's lives in a conservative society. It was music that said the things nobody else was saying. It was transgressive, joyful, and alive. In the 1970s and 80s, a new generation took Ra'i and transformed it. Young male singers calling themselves Cheb, meaning young, to distinguish themselves from the older generation, began mixing the traditional Ra'i melodies with synthesizers, drum machines, electric guitars, and influences from European pop, reggae, and American funk. Artists like Cheb Mami, Cheb Khaled, and Cheb Hasni propelled the genre to an international stage using electronic synthesizers and drum machines to reimagine the traditional percussive grooves into a modern, internationally appealing dance form. Cheb Khaled, the king of Raï, was at the center of all of this. His 1992 recording, Didi was a phenomenon, a song that blended Algerian melody with a driving, danceable beat that worked in clubs from Oran to Paris to Mumbai. It became one of the best-selling singles of that year across multiple continents. But Raï was not just music, it was a cultural battleground. But Raï was not just music, it was a cultural battleground. During Algeria's Black Decade, the civil war of the 1990s, Islamist militants targeted Raï musicians specifically. The music was seen as corrupt, Western, immoral, a threat to Islamic values. Several Raï musicians were assassinated, including the beloved Cheb Khaled, shot outside his parents' home in Oran in 1994. Hasni was 26. His death was one of the most shocking moments of a decade full of shocks, and it turned him into a martyr for Algerian artistic freedom. Raï survived. It moved to France, where a large Algerian diaspora community kept it alive and gave it new audiences. It crossed into Moroccan, Tunisian, and Egyptian music. It influenced French pop. Sheb Mami sang alongside Sting on the song Desert Rose in 1999, bringing Raï to mainstream Western audiences who had never heard it before. Today, Raï is a living tradition. New artists are continuing to experiment with it, blending it with hip hop, electronic music, and R&B. The cabarets of Oran still pulse with it. And somewhere in that tradition, in the straight talking, pleasure embracing, politically aware, musically irresistible soul of Raï, you can hear Algeria itself. Algeria's dominant sporting passion is football. The national team, the Phoenix, named for the desert fox, has produced some of the finest players in African football history. They won the Africa Cup of Nations in 1990 and again in 2019, when they won the tournament unbeaten across 35 consecutive games, one of the greatest runs of form in international football history. The 2019 title sparked scenes of wild celebration across Algeria and among the Algerian diaspora in France that are still talked about as one of the great collective joys of modern Algerian life. Individual Algerian players, Rabah Majer, whose backheel goal for Porto in the 1987 European Cup final is one of the most celebrated goals in European club football history, and the generation that followed him have contributed enormously to both Algerian and French football. Yassine Brahimi, Riyad Mahrez, Premier League champion with Leicester City in 2016, one of the great upsets in football history, and the extraordinary talent who continues to emerge from Algerian football academies all contribute to a tradition that runs deep. Beyond football, Algeria has a strong tradition with athletics, particularly middle and long distance running. Hasiba Boulmerka won the 1500 meters gold medal at the 1992 Barcelona Olympics, becoming the first Algerian and the first Arab woman to win an Olympic gold medal in track and field. She was also, because she ran in shorts and without a veil, targeted by Islamist extremists who threatened her life. She continued competing. She is one of the great sporting heroes of Algeria and of African athletics. Nuruddin Morselli, 1500 meters world record holder in the early 1990s, Olympic gold medalist at Atlanta in 1996, one of the finest middle distance runners in history, also Algerian. Algeria is, for most Western travelers, an unknown country. It receives relatively few tourists, a combination of complex visa processes, limited tourism in the south, and due to the infrastructure and reputation shaped by the violence of 1990s that has never fully been updated in the world's imagination. This is beginning to change slowly. The Algerian government has in recent years made serious efforts to open the country to tourism, simplifying visas and investing in infrastructure. Those who do visit Algeria almost universally report the same thing. The scale of the Saharan landscape defies all expectation. The Roman ruins are as magnificent as anything in Italy, without the crowds. The food is extraordinary. The people are warm, curious, and proud. And the country has a depth of history: Neolithic, Amazigh, Phoenician, Roman, Byzantine, Arab, Ottoman, French, independent, that very few countries on earth can match. What Algeria most wants the world to understand is that it is not defined by its colonial experience, as formative as that was. It is defined by what came before, by the Amazigh, who have been here for 10,000 years, by Saint Augustine and al-Qadir, by the painted caves of Tassili, by couscous and merguez, and Dejlat Nur dates, and the songs of Cheb Khaled rising from the cabarets of Oran into the Mediterranean night. It is the largest country in Africa. It has been underestimated for too long. Algeria, where the Roman emperors built their cities, where the first autobiography in Western literature was written by a North African bishop, where a music was born in the backrooms of port city cabarets and ended up in the top 40 in Paris, London, and Mumbai, where the Sahara, ancient, vast, terrible, beautiful, keeps its secrets in rock paintings made 10,000 years ago, and where, in July 1962, after 132 years of colonial rule and 8 years of brutal war, a nation declared itself free and danced. Next week, we stay on the alphabetical path and head to a tiny country you might not have on your map: Andorra, a landlocked microstate of barely 77,000 people, tucked between France and Spain in the Pyrenees mountains, with no airport, no army, and yet a fascinating history and identity entirely its own. Plus, it's a tax haven with some of the cheapest shopping in Europe. Yes, really. That's next Monday at 7 p.m. Don't miss it. Please subscribe or follow the show on whatever platform you're listening on. Leave a rating if you can, it helps enormously, and share it with someone who loves to learn about the world. I'm Ray. We've been to Algeria. The desert remembers everything.